In the old tales of the North, the world of humankind bordered on the realm of the giants, ancient beings of immense size, many of them hostile. Most lived far to the east, in a wild country called Jotunheim. Reaching it meant crossing the sea and entering a land where roads vanished among forests and mountains. Thor knew the giants well. He was the god of thunder, the defender of the human world, and stronger than any other god. He carried a hammer that could shatter stone, and he had defeated many giants before. So when Thor set out eastward once again, he had little reason to doubt his strength. Loki went with him. A master of tricks and transformations, Loki trusted his wits more than his strength. Their other companions were two young humans, Thialfi, who could run faster than any man alive, and his sister, Roskva. Before they reached the sea, Thor left behind his chariot and the two goats that drew it. The four travelers continued on foot, crossed the water, and landed on a lonely coast at the edge of the giants' country. An enormous forest rose before them. They walked beneath its trees until evening without seeing the other side. The trunks stood close together, their branches shut out the sky, and the last of the daylight soon disappeared among the roots. Thialfi carried their provisions, but no one wanted to stop in the thickets. They pressed on until full darkness, looking for somewhere they could sleep. At last, they found a vast structure. In the gloom, it looked like a long hall, open at one end. Thor walked around it, found no sign of an owner, and decided that it would shelter them for the night. They had not been asleep for long when a violent tremor woke them. The floor heaved, the walls shuddered, and a deep rumble rolled through the forest. A second shock followed, stronger than the first. Thor sprang up and seized his hammer, Mjolnir. While searching the shelter, Loki found a narrow opening in the wall to their right. Beyond it lay a small chamber where Thor's three companions could huddle together. They took refuge there. Thor remained by the main entrance with his hammer ready. The rumbling continued for much of the night. At times it stopped, only to begin again with enough force to make the ground quiver. At dawn, Thor went outside alone. A giant lay asleep on his back only a short distance away. His chest rose with every breath, and each time he exhaled, the same low thunder passed through the trees. What the travelers had taken for an earthquake was nothing more than his snoring. Thor tightened the belt that multiplied his strength and kept one hand on Mjolnir. The giant opened his eyes, sat up, and regarded him without alarm. "What is your name?" Thor asked. "Skrymir. I have no need to ask yours. I know Thor, the god with the hammer." Skrymir looked around. "Now, where did I leave my glove?" He reached for the traveler's shelter and picked it up. The immense hall folded between his fingers. Thor stared as he understood. They had spent the night inside Skrymir's glove. The side chamber where his companions had hidden was the thumb. Skrymir offered to travel with them. He knew the country, and Thor agreed, though he kept a careful eye on him. Before they left, the giant suggested that they pool their provisions. He packed the travelers' provisions with his own, tied the mouth of the bag, slung it across his back, and led the way. All day, Thor and his companions struggled to keep pace. Skrymir stepped over fallen trunks and boulders without slowing. By evening, he had found a place beneath a great oak where they could spend the night. "I am going to sleep," he told them. "Take the bag and prepare your supper." He stretched out under the tree. Moments later, he was snoring. Thor dragged the bag closer and began working on the knot. The cords had been pulled tight, but that should not have stopped him. He tugged at one loop, then another. Nothing shifted. He turned the bag over, forced his fingers between the cords, and tried to prise them apart with the handle of his hammer. The knot held. His companions searched for a loose end. The longer they worked, the more the cords seemed to merge into a single, solid mass. Skrymir slept on peacefully. Thor listened to his steady breathing, while the others, exhausted after the march, waited for a meal they could not reach. At last, anger overcame him. He gripped Mjolnir in both hands, strode up to the giant, and brought the hammer down on the crown of his head. Skrymir opened one eye. Did a leaf fall on me? He noticed Thor standing beside him and raised his head a little. Have you eaten? Are you ready to sleep? Thor stepped back. Yes, we were just going to bed. Skrymir closed his eyes. The four travelers settled beneath another tree, still hungry. None of them slept soundly. Around midnight, the giant's snores once again filled the forest. Thor rose. This time he approached without a sound, tightened his grip on Mjolnir, and struck the center of Skrymir's forehead. The hammerhead sank so deep that Thor was certain he had split the giant's skull. Skrymir woke almost at once. What was that? A branch? No. Perhaps an acorn. He turned towards Thor. Are you still awake? I have only just woken, Thor replied. There is plenty of night left. He went back to his companions, but did not lie down. He sat in the darkness, listening to the giant breathe. Shortly before dawn, Skrymir seemed to be sleeping deeply again. Thor decided that the third blow would end the matter. He hurried forward, lifted Mjolnir as high as he could, and drove it into the giant's temple with all his strength. The hammer sank up to its handle. Skrymir sat up, rubbed his face, and glanced into the branches overhead. There must be birds in this tree. I felt a little moss fall on my head. Then he rose as though nothing had happened. You are awake already? Good. The stronghold of Utgard is not far from here. He pointed east. You will meet men much larger than I am. Take my advice. Do not boast in front of them. The king of Utgard and his court have little patience for tiny travelers who think too highly of themselves. If you insist on going on, keep straight to the east. My road leads north. Skrymir threw the provision bag over his shoulder and disappeared among the trees. Thor watched him leave without trying to stop him. Neither Loki nor the two young humans suggested that they should ever seek him out again. The travelers followed his directions. Around midday, the trees finally thinned. A wide plain lay beyond the forest, and in its center stood a fortress. The walls rose so high that the four had to lean their heads back to glimpse the top. The gate was shut. Thor pushed it, tried to lift it, then set his shoulder against the doors and drove forward with all his strength. They did not move. Thialfi examined the grating and saw that there was enough room for a person to squeeze between the bars. Thor had to turn sideways, but all four managed to enter. Across the courtyard stood a great building with an open door. They went inside and found a hall full of giants. Those nearest the entrance were already enormous. The figures seated at the far end looked larger still. They watched the strangers approach from two long rows of benches, but offered no greeting. Thor and his companions stopped before the king. He studied them for a moment, then smiled. Looking at you, I would never have guessed that this little fellow was Thor. No one answered. I have heard the stories about you, the king continued. We shall see whether you deserve them. No one receives hospitality here unless he possesses a skill beyond that of ordinary men. Loki stepped forward first. No one in this hall can eat faster than I can. The king seemed pleased. At least that is easy to test. He summoned a man from the far end of the hall. The servants brought in a long wooden trough filled with meat and set it between the two contestants. Loki took one end, his opponent sat at the other. At the king's signal, both began to eat. Loki devoured the meat at an astonishing speed, hardly taking time to tear one piece free before reaching for the next. The other eater came on just as quickly, but left nothing behind. When they met in the middle, Loki had stripped every bone on his side. Opposite him, meat, bones, and part of the trough itself had vanished. The king pointed to the gnawed wood. "A remarkable appetite, Loki, but you have lost." He turned to Thialfi. "And what can you do?" "I can run," said the young man. "Choose anyone here to race me." The king led the court outside. A straight course ran across the level ground beside the walls, and a young giant took his place next to Thialfi. At the first start, Thialfi moved so quickly that Thor and Loki could barely follow him with their eyes. His opponent nevertheless reached the far end, turned, and met Thialfi before the human runner had crossed the line. The king admitted that few visitors to Utgard had ever run so well. Then he ordered a second race. Thialfi drove himself harder. By the time he neared the finish, his opponent had already touched the mark and was racing back towards him. Dozens of paces still separated them. Breathless, Thialfi asked for one final attempt. At the third start, he spent every scrap of strength he had left. The runner of Utgard reached the goal and was already turning back before Thialfi had covered half the course. The king ended the contest. Thialfi had outrun every ordinary human, but that was not enough to win at Utgard. The court returned to the hall. Every face now turned towards Thor. "What skill will you show us?" the king asked. Thor had watched Loki lose his contest and Thialfi fail 3 times. He chose a trial in which he believed his own power could not be questioned. "Bring these something to drink." The king called for his cupbearer, who returned carrying a long, curved horn. "Our best drinkers empty this in 1 draught," said the king. "Most need 2. Even the weakest finish it in 3. Thor studied the horn. It was long, but its mouth looked ordinary. After the march and a night without food, he was thirsty. He raised it and drank until his breath ran out. When he lowered the horn, he expected it to be almost empty. The level had fallen so little that he looked twice to make sure it had changed at all. The king leaned towards him. "A fair drink, but far less than I expected. No doubt he will finish the rest with your second draught." Thor said nothing. He caught his breath, lifted the horn again, and drank more deeply. The seconds stretched on. His chest tightened and his cheeks hollowed, but he did not stop until he had no air left. This time the level had clearly dropped. Well over half the drink remained. A murmur ran along the benches. The king inspected the horn, then looked at Thor. "If you mean to empty it in 3, you have saved an impressive final draught." Laughter rose around him. Thor took the horn, filled his lungs, and began again. He drank until it hurt, and stopped only when he could swallow no more. Then he handed the vessel back. The level had fallen for a 3rd time. The horn was nowhere near empty. The king examined it with the same scornful calm. "It seems your strength is less than the stories claim. Would you care to try something else?" "Yes," said Thor. "Name another trial." "The children here amuse themselves by lifting my cat. That should be within your reach." A large gray cat padded into the hall. Thor slipped an arm beneath its belly and lifted. The animal arched its back without moving its paws. Thor changed his grip, bent his knees, and drove upwards. The higher his hands rose, the farther the cat's body stretched. At last, one paw left the floor. Thor tried to raise it farther, but could not. He let the animal go. The king nodded. "The cat is large for someone of your size. We should have expected as much." The anger Thor had contained since entering the fortress finally broke free. If you think me so weak, send one of your men to wrestle me." The king surveyed the benches. "My warriors would consider it beneath them to fight a guest who cannot lift a cat. We shall find a more suitable opponent." He ordered his old nurse to be brought into the hall. A very old woman shuffled into the hall. Her back was bent, her face deeply lined, and her arms looked thin beneath her clothes. Thor took her arrival for another insult. Yet when she reached him, she set both hands firmly on his shoulders. The king gave the signal. Thor tried to drive her backwards. She did not move. He tightened his grip, attempted to lift her, then twisted to throw her off balance. The old woman's feet remained planted on the floor. Then she began to push. Thor had to move one foot to keep his balance. When he tried to recover his stance, she followed without loosening her hold. The longer they struggled, the stronger she seemed to grow. Thor felt his legs begin to buckle. He held out for another moment, then dropped to one knee. The king stopped the match. "Enough. The night is late, and there is no reason to seek another opponent." Thor rose without a word. The king had food served and gave the travelers places to sleep. No one challenged them again that night. At dawn, a table was waiting. They ate, gathered their belongings, and went towards the gate. The king accompanied them across the courtyard, through the grating, and out onto the plain. Once the walls stood behind them, he asked Thor what he thought of his stay. Thor answered plainly, "I have never known such shame. I won none of your trials, and everyone at your court must now think me worthless." The king glanced back at the fortress. "Now that you are outside, I can tell you what truly happened. Had I known how powerful you were, I would never have let you enter. Every one of us was in danger." Thor turned to face him. "I deceived you from the moment we met in the forest," the king continued. "Skrymir and I were the same man." He reminded Thor of the provision bag. Iron wires ran through the cords, making the knot impossible to loosen. Then he pointed to a mountain near the plain. 3 deep valleys had been cut into its summit. "You believed you were striking my skull. Each time your hammer fell, I placed that mountain between us. The first blow would have killed me. Look what the others did to the rock." Thor stared at the 3 scars. The deepest had been made by his last strike, the one he had delivered with all his strength before dawn. The king moved on to the contests inside the fortress. Loki's opponent was fire itself. Loki had consumed all the meat before him. Fire had consumed meat, bones, and wood. No creature could have eaten faster. The runner who faced Thialfi had been the king's own thought. The young man had run faster than any human who had come to Utgard, but even he could not outrun thought. When you drank from the horn, its far end lay in the sea. Thor looked towards the coast they had crossed days earlier. "We expected you to fail without making the slightest difference. Instead, you swallowed enough water to lower the sea. When you reach the shore, you will see how far the tide has withdrawn." Then the king spoke of the gray cat. Thor had believed he was trying to lift an unusually heavy animal. The illusion had concealed the Midgard Serpent, the vast creature whose body encircled the world and whose head almost met its tail. When one paw left the ground, you had raised the serpent until its back came close to the sky. Everyone in the hall was afraid. Only the wrestling match remained. The old woman is called Ellie. She is old age. No human, giant, or god can defeat her. Everyone who lives long enough must fall before her. Yet she forced you down no farther than one knee. The king stepped away. "We should part here. You will never enter my fortress again. If you return, I shall defend it with other illusions." Thor raised Mjolnir at once. He meant to strike before the king could deceive him again, but the hammer met only empty air. The king had vanished. Thor swung towards the fortress, ready to break it stone by stone. There was no gate behind him, no wall, No hall crowded with giants. An empty plain stretched to the horizon. Thor, Loki, Thialfi, and Roskva searched for any trace of the stronghold. They found nothing, and at last turned back towards the country of the gods. Thor now knew that he had held the Midgard Serpent in his hands without ever seeing it. He resolved that one day he would seek the creature himself in the depths of the sea.